I've been awake for a couple hours, reflecting on a few things to do with masculine despair, hopelessness, alienation, and I think this concept of the fear of freedom. I was in a group chat, for example, and it came up this idea that in the past people weren't enslaved by force. If anything, it was through ideas. And I distinctly remember reading that on the murder mile, enslaved people were left there with the idea being the men, for example, or the males could walk away, but they would be leaving behind their children and their partners. And so, on this basis alone, for the most, they opted to remain there. And I think these ideas endure through to today. Take, for example, the crime of sexual violation. We've heard plenty of times, in the female context at least, that these women could not give consent. That was one aspect of it, but another one was that even when they resisted, they were violated regardless. And yet, just ask yourself, do you buy into this? Do you think this was involuntary? I mean, there is this idea of consensual non consent, and revisionism can work retrospectively, in as much as, like we have this Me Too fiasco today, people can revise things back then and say, oh my gosh, he made me do it. But you don't think there was times that the taskmaster just rocked up. An enslaved woman came over and said, my word, this man is a boss. He takes care of business. As a matter of fact, he's my daddy. And it's got on their knees and started to serve him because they saw it as natural. Whereas their supposed men, they despised them and didn't want to cooperate with them. Or better yet, were happy to lord over these men that they had been put in charge of. In other words, do you think this was all by force? I would seriously encourage you to reflect on this because we have these fitting categories that we deal with when it comes to the world, and yet oftentimes these prevent us from seeing the world collectively. I'm talking as people. So just look at a woman today, especially our sisters, and then think back and ask yourself what has changed. Look at their situation, hopeless, their men in a weak, vulnerable position. They could hardly see them as men, actually, males, boys, as they were often called for the longest part. And then they're going to look across and see the man, the one with gender, the one in charge, as opposed to the bottom feeder. They saw who was on top and they said, you know what, I want to get on top. And they would know, of course, that they would never be blamed for any of this behavior. Rachel Heiberg may have seen it called. And yet, we could just say it's diminished responsibility, limited accountability, as it were. Just knowing that irrespective of what you do, you will never be held responsible. And so, you can enjoy it. As a matter of fact, we could even look at the element of masochism, taking great pleasure in the pain, or this concept of being restrained, and through this restraint being liberated. Whips and chains excite me, we believe our singer actually articulated and expressed. That's some of my immediate thoughts here. Now, I'd like to compare this with the male predicament, the ongoing conundrum, as recently I've been reflecting on the despair and hopelessness of males. Now, there are a myriad of reasons as to why this came up, and I'm not sure I can even begin in terms of stating how many layers this issue has. But let's just pick up on one point, this idea of male desperation and loneliness, which I ultimately hope to develop and expand upon through this series, and to delve a lot deeper into some of these male issues which gets overlooked, for example. So I want to go into some of the alternative lifestyle I want to go into the scene and to explore Far-B dragons, as it were, and to really interrogate these conventions when it comes to masculinity and the like, as there's so much to say, but of course, the half has never been told. So recently we was talking about men who will do anything for vagina because they feel invisible. Now, I am going to try and look for a quote, although I'm not sure if it's at hand, but bear with me, please, because this is for me the start of the discussion, and I feel it really speaks to the issues that we're trying to interrogate here. So, this is a recent exchange I've had with a friend, and of course, they identify as same gender loving, SGL, for want of a better term. Now, this is a party which I've stumbled upon, which I find to be very comical. But listen to this script. Here's the blurb. So this is a party and they've demanded black penis. And it says, unlike other swinger parties, where you black men are having to quote unquote bring your game to get noticed by a female to be quote unquote chosen to get to play with her, our T girls have strict instructions to serve. So, black guys, there is no quote unquote game playing, no waiting, no competition. You can have as many of our trained sluts pleasuring you and your dick at any time that you desire. Ever had one femme rimming your asshole whilst another is sucking your C, whilst there are two more licking on your nipples, four femmes at once? It will drive you into a frenzy. So, which one will you F first? As all four move to get on all fours to receive your D. Trying to be PG here, although it may be in vain. So, black guys, our parties went from 8 p.m. until midnight in a private home. And hear this part now. Hear this part. So that black men can have their cocks worshipped by multiple greedy girls. I'm going to compare this to the BMFC. It also says RT girls are the cream of the London crop. You get to see their pictures first too. They are clean and their holes are well douched and sweet smelling in order to perceive your attention. And this part is fascinating. It says, they all know that anal is tighter than P. Condom use only. And it also says, if you are a man of black Afro / Caribbean, not sure what that is, heritage, just say African, and would like to attend future parties and find out what you have been missing, fear of missing out, for these years, then do send me a private message so that I can get the ball rolling for you. Now, there's also what I believe is called DL parties. Another one which has come up is cruise, and I'm just going to be dropping names because you're either in or you're out. So with these DL parties, you can go there with a mask, and I believe it's male only, whatever that means in this modern age. So I suppose anything goes. So I want you to compare these three. I've been to two of these. There's the BMFC, and I've been to these DL parties as well. And I would honestly say that everyone who's interested in male dynamics should go to these events, whatever you think of them. And I'm not saying to be judgmental or the like, but it really helps to contextualize what's being said and to understand male socialization and conditioning, and ultimately desire, which I feel is for the most part engineered. In other words, men are trained to be a certain way, to ultimately bow down to all their impulses and all of their urges, and essentially to indulge without critically interrogating or reflecting upon what they're doing what motivates them and what drives them. In other words, they're literally supposed to be creatures of habitat. Whereas the saying goes, in terms of counterbalancing this, don't just do something, sit there. But we're not on autopilot. And their highest ideal in terms of this programming is to have all of their wishes fulfilled, even though this may mean many of their dreams are destroyed. And I think that this male drive is ultimately distorted and exaggerated in order to be manipulated so that men can be controlled. But still, this concept of virility comes to define the one dimensional man who seems unable to see themselves as anything more. Now, don't get me wrong, I went to the BMFC, for example, and I saw a couple of T girls, let's just say. Some of you might say Transformers, but let's just call them T girls. As a matter of fact, I saw three, and eventually I saw a couple brothers speaking and approaching them. Now, here's the fascinating part, because this is where I'm going to add two more parties that I've been to. I went to TG, Torture Garden, and surprisingly, I saw these same two T girls there. Also, notably, at this BN Black Man's Fan Club, which is a misnomer, mischaracterization, as it was more like Black Slave Fan Club, and as much as men were chasing these women around, it was a ratio thing, and these greedy girls got to be validated constantly by men who simply threw their dignity out the window. At this BMFC, there was a couple of girls who I saw the next day at Nubian Nights, which is another party, albeit one I would strongly advise against. I also have coded parties coming up. I've been unable to get a ticket refund, but I will attend and feedback to you on what I see. Maybe I could delve into all of these parties a bit more separately in future. But I saw a couple of these Beckys at this Nubian Nights party, and a separate one who I think guys were taken upstairs and holding hostage essentially. I'm sure you can imagine the dynamic. Greedy guys and not greedy girls, or men who are just so far from being satiated, they'll take whatever scraps are there and even compete with each other, which was a word which I heard at the Black Man's Fan Club. So it was very much a delight to see these same two girls coming along to Nubian Nights, having attended Black Man's Fan Club. And I will say this, because I'm just going to ultimately state things for men who I believe need this information. I wouldn't say these females who came along were necessarily in shape, as what I saw at the BMFC was, let's just call them the over 40 crowd, or it weren't the pick of the bunch, as it were. As I think tends to happen with these things, as seems to have happened with Swingfest, there's people who are long past their prime and having their last dance, as it were. I mean, it was said about Sir James Goldsmith, for example, quote, now that I've made my millions, I could finally afford the luxury of a social conscience. But likewise, now that no one wants these females, they can finally express their sexual selves. So when you go to these things, you're not necessarily going to see anyone who's desirable, as it were. You'll have to force yourself. And if you go back to the hygiene thing, there's one point where this girl was getting pounded in the room, and I'm telling you, it stunk. It was foul. It was disgusting. Yet these brothers were just sitting there acting like they couldn't smell anything. I said to myself, how low have you got to be for this to happen? If this is your life. So I made a couple of friends there. Well, I can't say friends, associates, as it were. Or met with a couple of brothers who we may link up in the future, who knows? But I think it's one of the key things to do here. And whilst I don't want to discuss anything that I do, I will say that when people were engaging in acts, it was follow the leader type thing. So these men would follow them around. There was even one time when some girl was being pounded, and some guys, there's about four of them, just sitting there on the bed, hoping to get some. And I'm thinking to myself, if that's the dynamic, then surely you might as well just go to a gangbang, because that's what you're doing, really. This isn't swingers as such, this is just a gangbang. That's the dynamic you've turned it into. Or, as I was saying, the First Brigade. So I found that painful, but that's what we're dealing with. Now I'm also going to deal with this party, the DL one. There is a name for it, which I would need to somehow get hold of. But I saw men of all shapes and sizes there. And what's curious is, for the most part, there's some voyeurs, as happens, the spectator gang, and others are just playing with each other. Now, I was with someone there, someone who identifies as same gender loving, and they said that someone straight went down on them. I've heard stuff like this before. As a matter of fact, one of their friends, I thought it was just same gender, but it turns out they swing both ways. But apparently, they took home a straight man, and they was with this woman. Now, this guy's straight, but they engaged in a very interesting threesome. The condition being that whilst they went into men, given he was eating out the woman, his bottom was up for grabs. So yes, he would be going down on her, but his ass would be up and there for the taking. So this is a dynamic a straight male engaged in. So when this person I was with said that a straight man set them off, it made sense. And I've even seen that other piece by one of these writers speaking about, is your man bisexual? Not in the shows at all sense, but in another sense. Or is your man gay? I believe the book is entitled. I would need to get that and ideally point the references. So given that, you would have to wonder, are the men who go to this deal event straight? And then this is questions about identity and behavior. I recall the Download Chronicles as well, with Boo, who insists that he is straight, despite sleeping or playing with men. So that's something to reflect upon. Now, I would also compare this or juxtapose this with the female predicament, where, as I said, women are fetishized, men are punished. So women can engage in these behaviors. There is no penalty. As a matter of fact, it's expected. So I was at a queer party over the weekend, and this girl, oops, my bad, this person I was with, they identify as non-binary or trans, just started grinding on another person. Let's just say they looked female, as it were. And I thought to myself that as a man, it does not work like that. That's what I thought. It could be a self-limiting belief, but this was what I simply reflected upon. There seems to be a complication when a penis is thrown into the mix. And I just thought to myself, this is how easy it is for women, because in the clubs, you see this all the time, girls grinding on girls. Now, just imagine that men start grinding on men, which is something I advocate in addition to this concept of political gayness. I feel that men need to all identify as gay anyway. Hopefully, I could get into that during another broadcast. That's something I said. I've also expressed quite plainly that I don't think that any of our people, us melanated people, us African people, or whatever you want to phrase us, our collective, as I will use the term here, I don't think any of us are straight. Now, I'm not saying we're bent per se. I don't think any of us could qualify as straight. There's a number of reasons for that. So this binary, it's something I would seriously contest. I'm accepting that there tends to be major issues when it comes to men exploring. Now, I believe there's something called a skirt club where girls get to play with each other. And I think that what happened in this DL club, I think the name is, talk about that for a label, is men get to experiment and play and explore with each other. However, there is no stigma or shame or judgment, as it were, because no one knows who's in there. Albeit, one thing I will remember is there was a man who had a no face mask and no hood. That's one of the things that come with this. And he said, well, if someone recognizes me, the question is, why were they here? Now, I also want to add a couple more things. I think this video may even go to the half-hour mark, which is curious, but I may just keep going with it as it's stuff that ultimately needs to be said. And I'm on one at the moment. I'm on a roll. I was at Riot Party. I'm gonna have to give so many references, if anything. And I was speaking to this gentleman who likes to dress up as a pup, as it were. And he said he went to a femdom party. Maybe it was Club Domina, maybe it was Pedestal. And he said he walked in with his trainer, his handler, walked out, And this happened a few times, but he said whilst he was there was a female sitting on a pedestal, a stool, who was worshipped, as it were, eaten out for at least 3 hours because he clocked out the amount of times he was in and out. I said to myself, imagine that. This is where it's really going to get interesting. 3 hours, and then he added, I couldn't say she was more than a six. And yet, look at this treatment that she can get. Now, there's a number of dynamics which I could bring up in terms of the right party. But I will say this. What place can men go to sit there and be worshipped for 3 hours? I could end the tape here, as they say with Bobby Hemmett. Stop the tape. What place? Now, I passed this to a friend I did relay, and he said, oh, I knew a millionaire now. This is the example he's brought up, Floyd Mayweather, essentially. He knows a millionaire who had this, I don't want to be able to identify her, let's just say established woman who had a very respectable career or something where she was established in it for a while. But she was essentially his servant who would wait for him and do whatever he pleased or desired. Essentially, his pet. That was his example. So this girl who's barely a six, he's saying that in order to be there, the best example he can give is a millionaire. And we're not talking institutions, we're not talking patterns, we're not talking structures. Because this is clubs we have devoted to men worshipping women. Please, what clubs do we have devoted to women worshipping men? Oh, wait. Look what I have here. I'm going to read you something. This one's funny. Look at this. I may have something to balance this out. Unlike other swinger parties, where you black men are having to bring your game to get noticed by a female to be chosen to get to play with her, our T girls have strict instructions to serve. So, black guys, there are no limits. There's no game playing, no waiting, no competition. You can have as many of our trained sluts pleasuring you in your dick at any time that you desire. This is what men have to do in order to be recognized, in order to be appreciated, or as I say, just to be seen. And if you look at how this is phrased, because I think this is actually worded by men, it says, ever had one rim in your ass while another is sucking your C, whilst there are two more licking on your nipples. So the center in here is pleasure. Okay, think about that. The center in here is pleasure. When females play, it tends to be this binary or this concept of pleasure as opposed to penetration or how to balance them out in terms of the spectrum. As a matter of fact, there's this girl I was dealing with who made it difficult for me, but she said there was a same gender loving female in her class who she did a thing with in a day. And I said to her something along the lines of, why is it complicated for me and you, but for her, there's none of this complication? And that thing was essentially to cry at me, to shush me, to divert away from this. And if you actually want it, now it's come back to me to shame my expectations and desires, to minimize this reality. This is the key dishonesty which I'm talking about in terms of these gender relations. That was her response. No, don't look here. Look the other way. That's what she told me. So, this is the irony. And this is that thing about male exceptionalism where they say, yes, some men are doing the killing, but also some men are doing the creating because men are risk takers. So, in summary, yes, you can get a place where men are worshipped, but it won't be across genders. What I'm saying is that it is same gender. You can get a place where women are worshipped by men, but you can also get a place where women are worshipped by a woman. Now, you can get a place where men are worshipped by men, but you will struggle to get a place where men are worshipped by women. And that's what this all comes down to. That's what this whole talk, that's what this whole channel holds to be interrogating and then essentially deconstructing. As KRS-One would say, why is that? And of course, this isn't hidden. I believe even Camille Paglia spoke about this when she came onto one of those broadcasts, and it's not something that even require some type of case studies or surveys. It's something that we can see before us, in our face, as it were. This idea that men are not desired and wanted, that they must earn their personhood. I'm very skeptical about the term humanity, albeit it's been used by the likes of Tommy Curry and T. Hassan Johnson. But this says a lot about male anonymity and invisibility. And where I was going with this is, remember, this girl was a 6, not even anything spectacular. Now, okay, we have the concept of fluidity and how women tend to relate to each other beyond the looks. I think it was Nora Vincent who said female sexuality is a lot more varied and nuanced. And yeah, this for me is the entry of the transgender dynamic. If you recall, because Paglia says they or she is transgender, if you can recall what was said about how it is that men are presented as beasts and burdens, as it were, then I wouldn't be surprised if there are men entering into this transgender space to escape this stigma. In fact, I think it's possible that some men are doing this transition that for once they can be desired and wanted, albeit they are no longer externally presenting as men. In other words, they are so out of touch, beleaguered, alienated, that just to feel a form of cutting almost, they will transition to the gender that is seen, that is heard, that is valued, that is respected. I'd urge you to seriously pick that up and reflect on it, on what this says about our supposed privilege, as this has been reduced to males using bathrooms, or the other nuance of males going into women's prisons. Why would you need to do all of this just to be seen? And recall, something I need to point out, I was looking at these men in these scenarios, the ones where they're not masked or hooded, and these are attractive men. These, aside from the social misfits, as it were, who, regardless of their looks, are not sure how to act, these men are good looking. A lot of them are in shape, and where I'm going is consistently, these women don't deserve these men, if I'm very blunt and forward with you. They're not on the same level. But these men are lowering themselves. They are abandoning their standards. They're thrown out of the window just to get some, because they've been programmed and socialized to believe that the end all is vagina, that their God is vagina, that this is the ultimate thing in the world, that this is the only way they could validate themselves. And it was obvious, because even in the context, there was men who said to me, I've had mine, so I'm happy for today. Just because they've gotten off, they can now relax. In other words, it's as if they're on a crest like Link from the Zelda games, and they must return with this gemstone, Schmeagol from the ring. They must have this, or they are not, as it were, human. That without this, they are shamed and dishonored. Now, we know that females do not have the identity subject to these antagonisms and forces. Female identity is stable. There's no need to constantly validate and prove themselves, but males are fragile. This privilege which people are talking about, it scarcely seems to exist, because the male identity is always on a string, it's always fragile or precarious, as has been said. It is never secure, it is never stable, it is always questioned, it is always subject to interrogation and to ultimately extinction. So the male is an endangered species, in as much as they are always under the cosh, they are always under suspicion. They can never have anything to themselves. And so the male can never be someone. They must also be at the mercy of the judgment of others, because they are not permitted this luxury of complacency and comfort. It does not exist. And these are the forces, these are the factors that are shaping this male desperation and loneliness, that they feel they need to be on these apps, begging women for sex. Or as one man actually put it to me, a war of attrition. That's why men are going through all of these lengths to go to parties like Riot. Some of them even pretending to be homosexual or the like, hoping, praying they can be validated, that a woman will give them a stroke, a hug, a kiss, searching for this ever elusive intimacy which they are denied, much like the British went into these countries, colonized them, took the resource and then said, you must pay taxes to get back what should rightfully be yours. And yet the question is, which woman in her right mind would ever give up this power, this prestige, this privilege.